Under the olive tree knits, how to pick up stitches from a provisional cast on. In this video I'm going to show you how to pick up the stitches that were made using a provisional cast on with a crochet hook. The sample I'm working on is a small section of the Christmas cracker wrap which began with a provisional cast on. We're now going to unpick those stitches and get them back on the needle so that we can work the other end of the picot bind off. So what we need to do is just find the end where we made a crochet chain and just unpick the knot there, and it should unzip. So if you pull the end of the yarn, it should unzip that crochet chain. The key here is to go really slowly, so every time you pull the yarn out of a stitch, you want to pop that stitch straight onto your needle. Not sure what happened here, but I've got the provisional cast on going through the stitch here, so what I'm going to do is just pull that yarn through the stitch. It helps to pinch your work right at the top, just below the crochet chain, so that every time you pull the yarn out of a stitch, you can pop the stitch straight onto your needle. As I say, the key here is to go really slowly and just catch those stitches one by one. At this point, I wouldn't worry too much about the orientation of the stitch. The main goal here is just to get those stitches secured onto the needle. So from here you can just continue unzipping the length of the crochet chain and just popping the stitches onto your needle as you go. If you think you may have missed picking up a stitch along the way, if you realise straight away, you can just use a stitch marker to mark the points on the work so you can come back to it later. There will be another video to show you how to identify if you've missed picking up any stitches and how you can get your stitch count back on track on the next row. One thing to note when you're picking up the stitches is that you're actually picking up the stitches in between the stitches that you cast on. So for example, this section here where you've got the yarn over, knit one, yarn over, you're actually picking up the stitches at the top of the yarn overs. And there's no stitch that follows the column of the knit one stitches in between those two yarn overs. This is because the stitches that we're picking up are offset by half a stitch from the stitches that we cast on. So by the time you've picked up all of the stitches and put them onto your needle, you'll actually end up with 94 stitches rather than the 95 that we cast on. But what happens if you don't have 94 stitches on your needle? You may have missed picking one up when you unzip the crochet chain. So here I'm going to show you how you can read your stitches and how you can get the stitch count back to where it needs to be for the next row. So starting at the beginning of the row, you should have 2, 4, 5 stitches before that first yarn over stitch. Then you should have a stitch into that yarn over, and then you should have 2, 4, and you'll notice here with the column of decreased stitches that were made in the lace, you should have 2 stitches that sit in that column of double decreased stitches. So after the stitch that sits at the top of the yarn over, you'll have 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches, and then the 2 stitches that sit in the middle of that column of double decreased stitches, and then another 4 stitches the other side of that. And then that will bring you back to the 2 stitches that sit in the top of the yarn overs. So you should have 1, 2 stitches there, and then again you should have 4 stitches, 2, 4 stitches, and then the 2 stitches that sit in the column of that double decrease stitch, so they'll sit in the center, and then you should have another 4 stitches the other side of those. So if you want to count these sections in tens, you can do. So you've got your 2 yarn over stitches, and then you've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And that's how you can check the stitches across the row. So you've got 2 for the yarn overs, and then for the sections between those yarn over columns you should have 10 stitches. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Then you've got the 2 stitches that sit in the yarn overs, and again in the next section you should have 10 stitches. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So you can continue working across the row and just checking you've got the right amount of stitches between each section. If you find you're missing a stitch at any point, you can use a locking stitch marker just to mark the point on the needle where the stitch should be, and then in the next video I'll show you how you can go and fix that and get the stitch count back to where it should be. As you get to the end of the row, you should have a stitch at the top of that yarn over column, and then the row should end with 5 stitches. So now we can go ahead and join the contrast colour to finish the bind off, and at this point you can go in and rectify any stitches that sit in the wrong orientation. So any stitches that sit with the back leg nearest to the tip of the needle, if you just knit into the back of that stitch, that will twist the stitch and get it back into the right orientation. So for example, this stitch here is in the wrong orientation, so I'm just going to knit into the back of it and that will just set it right. And the same for the next one and the next one. So that's how you pick up the stitches for the provisional cast on. And now that we've joined the contrast colour, this will be our first knit row, and then we're going to go and do another knit row. This will be followed by the picot bind off, so do refer to the previous video on how to work the picot bind off for this end of the wrap.